You ever have those quiet evenings where the world feels a little still and you just want to drift somewhere else for a while? That's the kind of mood I'm in right now. I was thinking about all the places games have taken me, the forests I've walked through, the cities I've gotten lost in, the skies I've flown across, and I thought it might be nice to share some of those journeys with you. So tonight, let's take it slow and wander through the top 20 open world games worth playing in 2025. Not just for the action or the quests, but for the moments that stay with you long after you've put the controller down. Think of this as me sitting beside you, just talking about the worlds that feel a little like home when you step inside them. I think back to the way the ocean looked in Just Cause 3, the sunlight glittering across the waves like it was hiding secrets just beneath the surface. And I remember how easy it was to lose hours just gliding over that water with a wingsuit. There was this quiet joy in knowing you didn't really need a destination. You could just drift from mountain cliffs to sleepy villages, hearing the wind in your ears and watching the world stretch endlessly around you. What stayed with me wasn't the explosions or the chaos people usually mention, but those in-between moments, when the sky turned soft orange and you felt completely free, like the island was breathing with you. It's the kind of game where you end up making your own little memories, maybe landing in a field just to sit with the view, or racing across the horizon without a single thought in your head except how alive it all feels. Looking back, Just Cause 3 was less about finishing anything and more about the feeling of flying, of being weightless for a while, and that's what makes it linger in my mind. There was a moment in Far Cry 4 that has never really left me. I was standing on a hillside in Karat, and the air was so still that I could hear prayer flags flapping faintly in the wind while snow brushed across the peaks far above. It wasn't about missions or gunfights right then, it was about how the land felt alive, like every path winding through the villages and forests was quietly inviting you deeper. You might have missed this one if you were only chasing the chaos, but I always remember the little things. Riding an old battered truck down a dirt road, watching the sun dip behind the mountains, or just pausing at a cliff edge with nothing but endless sky in front of me. There's a kind of calm in those spaces, even in a world full of conflict, and sometimes it felt less like a game and more like a place you carried in the back of your mind. Far Cry 4 surprised me with how personal it could feel, not in the loud moments, but in the silence between them, where the world itself seemed to be whispering its own story. There was a night in Days Gone when I was riding my bike through the forest, and the only sound was the hum of the engine and the faint rustle of trees swaying in the dark. The road stretched ahead like it had no end, lit only by the soft glow of my headlight, and for a moment it felt less like a game and more like a memory of being alone with your thoughts. You might have missed this one if you only saw the chaos and the danger, but what I remember most are the quiet pauses, stopping by a campfire to watch the smoke curl into the sky, or coasting downhill with the wind rushing past, the world feeling wide and uncertain but strangely comforting. There was a sadness to it too. A sense of carrying weight while still finding small moments of peace, and that balance is what made it special to me. Days Gone surprised me not with how big it was, but with how it let you feel the loneliness, the calm, and even the hope tucked into the corners of its world. Mad Max, when I found myself parked on a ridge, just sitting in the driver's seat with the desert stretching endlessly in front of me, the horizon painted in deep orange and dust hanging in the air like a memory that wouldn't fade. You might have missed this one if you only thought of it as noise and wreckage, but what I remember most are the silences. The way the world felt heavy and empty at the same time, where every mile driven carried a kind of loneliness, but also a strange beauty. Sometimes I'd just ride across the sands with no destination, the engine growling softly beneath me, the wind pulling at the car like it wanted to keep me moving forever. There was something almost peaceful about being surrounded by nothing but wasteland, like the quiet after a storm, and it gave me a feeling of freedom I didn't expect. Mad Max wasn't just about the battles or the scavenging. It was about those long, empty roads where you could feel the world breathing its last breath and somehow still find comfort in the stillness. Let's talk about Elden Ring. Who doesn't know the Elden Ring game? Everyone knows the Elden Ring game. I remember a moment in the game when I wandered into a wide, empty field and the sky above looked so heavy with gold that it felt like the world was holding its breath. I wasn't chasing a quest or looking for a fight, I just kept walking, listening to the soft thud of my footsteps and the distant cry of something I couldn't see. You might have missed this one if you only think of the difficulty, but what stayed with me were the quiet discoveries, like stumbling on a hidden church with candles still burning, or standing on a cliff and watching the wind move through the trees below. Sometimes it was frightening too, stepping into a cave and feeling the air grow colder, not knowing what waited in the shadows, but even then, it felt strangely beautiful, like every corner of that land carried a secret worth uncovering. Elden Ring surprised me with how alive its silence could feel, how it made even the smallest steps feel like part of something much bigger, and that's why it lingers in my memory more like a dream than a game. Friends, you must remember Watch Dogs 1 very well. When Watch Dogs 1 came out, who created such a stir? Watch Dogs 1 created such a stir. And as we are talking about Watch Dogs 2, you must have played this game too. I remember a moment in it that I want to share with you. Watch Dogs 2, when I climbed up a rooftop in San Francisco and the city below was waking up in this quiet, colorful way. The streets slowly filling with cars, the bay glimmering like it had just stretched itself awake, and the breeze carrying a kind of lightness that made me just want to sit there for a while. You might have missed this one if you only looked at it as hacking and missions, but for me, it was about those small, playful moments. Riding a bike along the waterfront with no real plan, or wandering through busy sidewalks just to watch the world feel alive around me. Sometimes I'd stop in a quiet park, listening to laughter drift from people nearby, and it felt less like a video game and more like a snapshot of being young and free in a city that never stopped moving. Watch Dogs 2 surprised me with its warmth, with how bright and hopeful its world could feel, and it left me remembering not the missions I finished, but the simple joy of just existing in that space for a little while.
I'll take that cash you had me, dope.
So let's talk about Star Wars Outlaws, which I share with you. When I landed on a dusty little planet far from anything familiar, and for a moment, the world around me was so still that it felt like I had stepped into someone else's forgotten story. The sky carried this pale glow, ships drifting silently above, while the ground beneath my feet felt rough and untouched, like it hadn't been walked on in years. You might have missed this one if you only think of blasters and starships, but what I remember most were the small human moments. Slipping through a crowded cantina where every face seemed to have its own secret, or standing by my ship in the quiet, staring out at a horizon that promised endless possibilities. There was a calm in those spaces between the chaos, a sense that even in a galaxy full of danger, you could still find peace in just exploring, in just being there. Star Wars Outlaws surprised me with how alive its silence could feel, how every corner whispered a story, and it left me holding on to the simple joy of wandering into the unknown with nothing but curiosity as my guide.
Get cover next.
There was a night in Hogwarts Legacy when I found myself wandering the castle halls long after the torches had dimmed, and the silence felt almost alive, like the walls themselves were whispering old secrets just for me. You might have missed this one if you rushed through spells and classes, but I remember pausing to watch the way moonlight spilled through the tall windows, painting the stone floors in silver, or hearing portraits murmur softly, as if they'd been waiting centuries for someone to listen. Sometimes I'd step outside and see the grounds blanketed in mist, the forbidden forest looming in the distance, and it gave me that same quiet thrill I used to feel reading about this world as a kid. There was wonder in the little things, the sound of an owl's wings cutting through the night, the flicker of candles floating gently above the great hall, and it made me feel like I wasn't just playing, but living inside a story I'd always dreamed of. Hogwarts Legacy stayed with me not because of what I did there, but because of how it made me feel, like I had finally walked into a place that was waiting for me all along. There's a memory that still feels clear to me, the moment I first drove out into the open world of Forza Horizon 5, and the road stretched so far ahead it felt endless, like a warm invitation to just keep going. You might not notice it at first, but there's something calming about the way the sun settles low over the Mexican horizon, washing everything in gold, or how the rain gently taps against the windshield before clearing into skies so bright it almost feels unreal. What I loved most weren't the big races, but those quiet drives when I'd wander off into the hills, the radio humming softly in the background, and suddenly a field of wildflowers or a mountain view would stop me in my tracks. Sometimes I'd take a detour just to see how the light shimmered off a lake, or how the dust curled up behind the tires, as if the world itself was alive and breathing with me. Forza Horizon 5 always felt less like a racing game and more like a place I could slip away to, where every curve in the road carried a little surprise, and every sunset reminded me why I stayed out there just a little longer, not to win anything, but to feel free. I remember just stopping in the middle of the city, perched on a rooftop in Marvel's Spider-Man 2, and the world felt so alive below me that I almost forgot to move. The streets carried their own rhythm, like each honk, each conversation, each flicker of neon light was a reminder that this place wasn't just a map, it was a living world breathing around me. Swinging through those skies never got old. The way the wind brushed past, the buildings rushing by, and that quiet pause at the peak of a swing where, for just a second, it felt like time held still. What surprised me most, though, were the small quiet moments, when Peter and Miles just shared words that felt human, like brothers leaning on each other, or when I'd land on a random fire escape and watch the city carry on without me. It reminded me that being Spider-Man wasn't just about the fights or the powers, but about feeling part of something bigger, like the city itself was a friend who never slept, always waiting for you to come back and glide through its heart once more. So you look out at the sky in a game and forget, just for a second, that it isn't real. That's what happened to me the first time I climbed high above the world in The Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom. There was this silence up there, broken only by the wind, and the land stretched out so far below that it almost felt like a dream I wasn't supposed to wake from. What makes it special isn't just the size of the world, but the way it invites you to linger, like stopping by a quiet pond to watch the ripples, or stumbling into a cave lit by crystals that glow like they're keeping secrets only you were meant to see. You might have missed this, but there's something beautiful about the way discovery feels in Hyrule. Not loud or rushed, but patient, like the game is saying, take your time, this place will wait for you. I remember gliding from one floating island to another, my shadow trailing across the clouds, and for a brief moment I felt small in the best way, like being part of something bigger, something that made the world outside the screen feel a little more magical too. There was a night when I couldn't sleep, and instead of staring at the ceiling, I found myself walking through Night City in Cyberpunk 2077 Ultimate Edition. It wasn't about missions or gunfights, it was just me wandering, listening to the hum of neon lights and the distant voices spilling out of street corners. There's a strange kind of peace hidden in that chaos, like standing on a balcony and watching the city move without you, alive in its own rhythm. What really stayed with me wasn't the action, but the quiet details, the way rain slid down a glowing sign, or how a song on the radio suddenly matched the mood of the street I was driving through. You might have missed this one if you only rushed through it, but there's a beauty in slowing down and letting the city breathe around you. I remember riding through the desert just outside the skyline, watching the lights fade into the horizon, and for a moment it felt less like a game and more like a memory I'd lived. One of those places you can step into when the real world feels too heavy, where the noise becomes strangely comforting, and the night feels like it's keeping you company. Everyone's favorite game and my most favorite and most played game, Red Dead Redemption 2, there is a moment in this game that I want to share with you, and you can also tell me your best moment in the comment section. Here is a moment in Red Dead Redemption 2 that don't feel like a game at all, but more like a quiet dream you drift into without noticing. I remember one evening when I rode across the open plains and the sun was sinking low, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and violet, and for a second it felt like time had stopped just to let me breathe. It wasn't about gunfights or outlaws, it was the way the world carried itself with such calm weight, every river flowing gently, every breeze brushing past the tall grass as if it had its own story to tell. You might have missed this if you only rushed through the missions, but there's something deeply moving in the slower moments, like when you sit by the campfire and hear a quiet song rise into the night, or when you stumble on a stranger's story out in the wilderness that leaves you thinking long after you've ridden away. The little details stay with you, the crunch of hooves on frosted ground, the way your horse nudges you softly when you pause too long, the silence of a mountain trail where all you can hear is your own breath. It surprised me how often I just stop, not to play, but to look, to feel the world holding me in place, reminding me that sometimes the most powerful adventures aren't about what you do, but about the quiet spaces you carry with you long after the screen fades to black. There's something I'll never forget about The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt Complete Edition. The way it felt to step into a village at dusk when the lanterns began to glow and the air carried this quiet heaviness, like the world itself was tired after a long day. It wasn't about fighting monsters or chasing quests, it was about the stillness tucked between them, the way a simple conversation with a weary farmer could leave you thinking more than the biggest battles. You might have missed this if you only hurried through the story, but there's a strange kind of peace in wandering those forests, hearing the crunch of leaves underfoot, or standing by the shoreline while waves rolled in, steady and endless. I remember one night when a storm gathered overhead, thunder shaking the skies, and I felt this small shiver, like the world wasn't just alive, but watching me. And then there were the softer moments too, when Geralt would sit at a fire, lost in thought, and it almost felt like you were sitting there with him, sharing that silence. What surprised me most was how the game never forced those feelings, they just appeared, in the way a sunset paints the horizon or a song drifts from a tavern, making you pause and listen. It's the kind of world that lingers with you not because of what you did there, but because of how it made you feel, like stepping into a story that keeps whispering to you long after you've put it down. Sometimes I think about Ghost of Tsushima directors cut the way you think about a dream that never really left you, like those mornings where you wake up and still feel the warmth of what you saw. There was this moment where I was just riding my horse across a field of tall grass, the wind pulling everything in one direction, and it felt less like a game and more like the land itself was breathing with me. You might have missed this if you rushed through the fights, but the beauty is in those pauses. The way a single red leaf floats down from a tree, or how the sound of a flute can make the whole world seem to soften around you. I remember stopping by a shrine tucked away on a cliff. The ocean stretched out endlessly below, and for a while I just stood there, letting the waves crash in the distance like a heartbeat that never stopped. What surprised me most was how the quiet moments carried more weight than the battles. How sitting by a hot spring, watching steam rise into the sky, made me feel closer to Jin's struggle than any sword could. It's not just a story about war, it's about silence, reflection, and those rare times where the world feels so alive that you forget where you're sitting. And long after you leave, the memory stays like the whisper of wind through grass, or the stillness of a sunset that felt like it was waiting just for you. Let's start now Horizon Forbidden West. This game is a game in which there is a moment that I share with you. I remember climbing a ridge and looking out over a valley where the machines moved like herds of living creatures. Their glowing parts catching the light as the wind carried dust across the horizon, and for a second it felt like standing in a world that had already forgotten us. You might have missed this if you only focused on the battles, but the real wonder is in the way the land feels alive, lush jungles that hum with strange sounds, quiet deserts where the sky feels too big for one person, and coasts where the waves crash so hard they almost drown out your own thoughts. What surprised me most was how often I just stop, not to fight or to chase a quest, but to breathe it in, watching Aloy walk through fields of wildflowers that sway in colors too bright to be real, or listening to a conversation by a fire that reminded me how much heart there is beneath all the danger. It's the kind of world where even silence has weight, where a single glance at the horizon can feel like a promise that there's more waiting if you just keep walking. And when you step away, those images linger, the shimmer of metal beasts in the distance, the warmth of sunlight breaking through clouds, and that quiet reminder that beauty and danger can live side by side and somehow make each other unforgettable.
Taking the shot! That hits its mark!
There's something about Assassin's Creed Shadows that makes me think of quiet evenings when the world feels a little slower, like stepping outside at night and noticing the way shadows stretch across the ground. I remember walking through a village as the lanterns flickered against old wooden walls, the sound of rain softening every footstep, and for a moment it felt less like a mission and more like drifting through a memory that didn't belong to me. You might have missed this if you only thought of it as another tale of blades and battles. But what stood out to me was the stillness, the way the wind moved through tall grass as if it was whispering secrets, or how slipping across a rooftop under the moon made the whole world feel hushed, like it was holding its breath for you. There were moments when the weight of history pressed in, when I saw temples lit by dawn, and it almost felt like watching time itself pause just to let me take it in. And even in the danger, there was a strange beauty facing an enemy in silence, knowing every sound mattered, every choice carried a kind of poetry. It surprised me how often I stopped not to fight, but just to stand and watch the light change, how the world seemed to invite me to notice the smallest details, a blossom floating in water, the echo of a bell in the distance, the warmth of color against a dark sky. It's the kind of place that lingers with you, not for the battles or victories, but for the quiet moments where you realize shadows can hold more life and meaning than the brightest day.
I can't do this alone. Come.
I will put you down.
I think about how the quietest moments can be found in the unlikeliest places, and Dying Light 2. Stay Human reminded me of that in ways I didn't expect. There was a night when I climbed to the top of a broken building, the city below dim and restless, and for a while I just stood there, breathing with the wind, watching the moonlight stretch across rooftops that felt both alive and forgotten. You might have missed this if you only saw it as a story about danger and survival, but to me it felt like walking through a dream where fear and beauty were constantly holding hands. I remember running across rooftops, the sound of my heartbeat matching the thud of footsteps, and then pausing to see the sunrise paint the whole skyline gold, turning the ruins into something almost sacred. Even in the chaos, there was this strange comfort. The way a single lantern glowed in the distance, or how laughter would drift from people gathered in a safe zone, reminding you that hope still existed. It surprised me how human it all felt, not in the grand moments, but in the little ones, the kindness of strangers, the way the streets told stories of those who once lived there, and the calm that came after a night of running, when the city finally let you rest. It's one of those places that stays with you, not because it's perfect, but because it shows you how fragile and beautiful survival can be when every step matters. There are nights when I think about cities, not just the ones we live in, but the ones that live in us, and Grand Theft Auto 5 always drifts back into my mind like a memory of some place I half remember visiting. You might not notice it at first, but there's a quiet kind of magic hidden between the chaos, like driving through Los Santos while the sun dips low, turning the whole skyline into this soft painting of orange and pink. I still remember pulling over by the beach one evening, just to sit there and listen to the waves, headlights glowing faintly behind me while strangers jogged along the sand, and it felt almost too real, like I'd stumbled into someone else's memory. What surprised me most wasn't the wildness or the big moments everyone talks about, but the stillness, the way the streets hum at night, the way neon lights buzz against the dark, or how a simple drive through the hills can make you feel weightless. It's strange, but sometimes the city feels alive in its own way, like it's breathing alongside you, offering little pieces of itself if you're patient enough to slow down and look. And that's what makes it linger for me, not just the stories or the action, but those quiet slices of life tucked inside a world that never really sleeps. Let's talk about our favorite game, Skyrim, which is now everyone's favorite game, and it is also a very popular game for everyone. I also liked it a lot. When it was launched, I found this game very unique and very good. There is a moment in it that I want to share with you before the video ends, almost like a memory of walking through another life. There's something about the way the snow falls in those mountains that makes you pause, like the whole world is whispering for you to slow down and listen. I remember wandering into a forest where the light broke through the trees in little golden streaks, and for a moment I forgot it was just a game. It felt like I was really there, my boots pressing into the frost, hearing the wind carry voices from places I hadn't discovered yet. What stayed with me weren't just the battles or the dragons, but the quiet things. Stumbling across a cabin with smoke curling from its chimney, hearing the soft crackle of a fire inside, or standing by a river at night and watching the stars ripple in the water. It's strange how a place you've never truly been to can still feel like a home you miss sometimes, and Skyrim does that. It wraps you in its world so gently that even the smallest walk down a snowy path feels like a story you'll carry with you long after you've put the controller down. I think that's a good place to pause for now. Spending this time together, just drifting through memories of these worlds, has been something I've really enjoyed. The top 20 best open world games worth playing in 2025 are more than just titles on a list. They're moments, little pieces of wonder that stay with you long after the screen fades. If you feel like it, you can share your own favorite moments down below, or maybe leave a like so we can keep building this quiet space together. And if you ever want to return, you're always welcome. There will always be more stories to share, more places worth walking through slowly. Thank you for being here with me tonight. It really means a lot. Take care of yourself, rest easy, and I'll see you again when the time feels right.